Hello and welcome to Fast Forward Newsline. My name is David Kattenberg. With us today is Fast Forward Newsline regular contributor Sara Aronson. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Dave.
Sara, on this very beautiful day, it happens to be a warm, sunny day in Winnipeg, I'd like to talk with you about the LEAP Manifesto. The LEAP Manifesto, this great leap forward that's been proposed by a group of folks, and it's been creating lots and lots of controversy. Let's talk about what the manifesto says in a moment, but can you very quickly sum up what the manifesto is and the kinds of commentary it's been generating? Because there's nothing like a good intellectual argument, and this LEAP Manifesto has obviously succeeded in generating lots of intellectual commentary, some of it a little bit over the top. What is the LEAP Manifesto, and tell me quickly what it's stirred up.
Okay, well, the LEAP Manifesto is I like to think of it as sort of an aspirational document for a future Canada that runs entirely on clean energy, where we've basically made a leap to an environmentally and economically sustainable Canada. And so in my mind, I don't see it as advocating a lot of things, anything that you haven't really heard before in especially sort of left-wing policy circles, but even in parties like the Green Party that doesn't consider itself explicitly left-wing. And the LEAP Manifesto was originally written in September of 2015, and it was released at the Toronto International Film Festival by Naomi Klein and Avi Lewis, and they didn't actually write it. If you know Naomi Klein, the author of No Logo, very well-known sort of author, and Naomi Klein and Avi Lewis, her husband, is actually Stephen Lewis's son, and he's a filmmaker. And they spearheaded this process where environmentalists and
First Nations folks, community development types?
Community development types, workers' rights folks, just different groups that came together, organized labor, and they had a discussion over 2 days in Toronto, and then out of this discussion came this document, which actually wasn't written by Naomi Klein and Avi Lewis. It was written by dozens of people.
Through a sort of a consensus approach, I suppose.
I imagine, yeah. They said that dozens of people were involved.
Now, the LEAP Manifesto had been out before the NDP convention took place, but tell me about what happened at the convention around the LEAP Manifesto. It was a huge bone of contention.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was,
and some say that the LEAP Manifesto, the critics say this is going to tear apart the NDP. This is going to destroy the NDP.
Right. Well, the interesting thing to note about the LEAP Manifesto is it wasn't an NDP document. Like, Avi Lewis didn't actually join the NDP until he needed to go to the meeting, to the convention, which was in early April, because he wanted to be there to discuss it. But it was originally meant as a nonpartisan document, but there were some folks in the NDP that brought it to the convention in April and wanted the NDP to affirm that it was a statement of their basic values, I believe, and also to have it debated for the next couple of years in their local constituency associations.
And what happened?
Well, they did have a debate. It was actually quite an interesting debate. I've never watched an NDP debate before, so it was really quite cool to hear them call each other sisters and brothers, which is a new thing for me. The labor culture was obvious there. And
this was back in late March?
This was April 8th to 10th was the convention. I think it was the last day of the convention.
In Edmonton?
In Edmonton, yes. And so they had quite a lot of spirited debate about it, and then they had a vote by a show of hands, and they amended their wording a little bit. I don't think they went and said like that the LEAP Manifesto represents their values outright, but they did say that they're going to be discussing it in the next 2 years in the constituency associations, and then after 2 years they're going to discuss whether parts of it could be incorporated into policy. So I don't think the idea was to adopt it wholesale. And that was, some people were even saying, some people at the convention were saying that would have, they felt like it was sort of a top-down approach to discussing this rather than a bottom-up approach, like to say that it's mandated that it's going to be discussed across the country. But other people say, well, it's a good idea just to have this discussion, period, because climate change is upon us, and it's time to start to really talk about how we're going to actually deal with this. But the problem with what happened...
And it created a huge furor in Alberta with Rachel Notley. Of course, for those who don't know, the provincial government in Alberta is New Democratic Party, quite progressive. They've come forward with what some think of as a progressive climate change policy, but the LEAP manifesto suggesting that we should be leaving oil in the ground and going 100% fossil fuel free caused a furor, and some say it's totally crazy, and this is no way. We got to build pipelines. Rachel Notley was saying we have to have pipelines to taking our Alberta oil to the shore. So,
well, first of all, the LEAP manifesto has a lot more in it besides not building infrastructure like pipelines. But the part where Rachel Notley had a big problem was the business about infrastructure, because it said that we should not be building any new infrastructure that engages us in extractive resource energy based on sort of extraction. So that includes pipelines, it includes tankers. It's not just pipelines, but pipelines are part of that, because the idea is once you invest in a pipeline, you're going to be wanting to use that pipeline for the full amortization period, because you've bothered to build it. But Rachel Notley was really upset about this. She actually said that the NDP in Alberta repudiates the energy infrastructure part of the LEAP manifesto. And part of the problem is that she's really been struggling to achieve establish trust with people in Alberta, because they're not used to an NDP government. And people are saying actually that it wasn't so much that Albertans chose the NDP, it was that they were tired of the Conservatives.
So okay, so the folks in Alberta are really upset at the fossil fuel reduction, leave it in the ground, don't build pipelines, don't invest in infrastructure, out the window with fossil fuel subsidies. They're upset by that. What have other people been saying? Other commentarists have been talking about how it's completely utopian and it's wacko and it's and crazy. Tell me about some of this commentary.
Sure. Well, there are actually, like, I divided into sort of about, there's several different commentaries, but there's 4 big ones I can talk about. First, that it's socially or technologically naive. Like, for example, we can just easily switch away from fossil fuels for agriculture. And Les McPherson wrote, "How are farmers supposed to harvest their crops without fossil fuels? Electric combines, plugged into what? Without fossil fuel, we'd be reduced to farming with hoes and sickles." So that's one type of commentary. Then we have, it's the lunatic fringe, it's radical, it's trying to overthrow capitalism. And so Tristan Hopper on September 16th wrote, "Stephen Lewis put his signature to a plan to overthrow capitalism on Tuesday, and then told the media that it doesn't necessarily mean that the centrist policies of Tom Mulcair aren't good too."
And the implication there being that if you propose moving away from fossil fuels and going carbon-free, this is anti-capitalist. As if there's no way to rethink capitalist economic organization that isn't fossil fuel based.
Well, exactly. There is that implication, and the implication of it being radical or left-wing is part of another critique, which is that it's going to destroy the NDP. Like, basically, it'll give their opponents fodder. It'll be like, look at these sort of left-wing, like, look how left-wing they become. So, for example, the Globe and Mail said the NDP will no longer be seen as the safe, just barely left-of-center budget-balancing party, but the radical nationalize the banks camp of its not-so-distant past. So they are saying that this, because Canadian politics is based on pragmatism, the idea is that we don't, the NDP won't get elected anymore because they'll be perceived as being too radical.
Now others, I'm going to try to abbreviate this a bit, but others are saying that this is highly practical. It's not pie in the sky. It's not cotton-eyed, fuzzy-headed stuff. It's extremely hard-headed and coherent.
Oh yeah, there's others. For example, Thomas Walkham in the Toronto Star in April said, he actually titled his article, "Middle of the Road, LEAP Manifesto Hardly Loony." And he said that it actually contains a lot of things we already agree on. The climate scientists think we urgently do need to stop fossil fuel production by the end of the century. It just so happens the LEAP Manifesto says we should have a clean economy by 2050, a little sooner. And also, he does point out that if we invest in pipelines, we will have more fossil fuel production. And Ottawa and the provinces already want investment in clean energy, which is what the LEAP Manifesto, clean energy projects, which is what the LEAP Manifesto calls for. BC already has a carbon tax. Trudeau Liberals are saying that they're going to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is another piece of the LEAP Manifesto. And we didn't really get to that because there are things other than environmental things in there, things about Indigenous rights, things about workers' rights, things about expanding jobs for low-carbon sectors of the economy, such as teaching and childcare and the arts, and also helping people who are already in high carbon jobs transition to the green economy. So basically a lot of people are saying, this stuff will be actually really good for the economy if we embrace it. Like Stephen Lewis called it the greatest job creation program on earth. And Linda McQuaig believes that rather than fearing the LEAP manifesto, she says, I say bring it on. It or something like it should be debated in every classroom, church basement, union hall, and Tim Hortons.
So what's going to become of the LEAP manifesto, Sara? Will it be debated? Is there an infrastructure in place and a plan and a strategy for debating it across the country in the upcoming months?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the NDP, that's what they resolved to do, right? And there was a delegate at the NDP convention that asked, this is, said, even if we do pass this resolution, how are we going to logistically make this happen? Like how are we going to get to the point where our constituency associations actually sit down and debate this? But that is their intention. And I think that other parties, the people are saying the Liberals are interested in it possibly as well. It's not partisan, so I think it's up to people to decide. The NDP are going to try to do it through their party, through the people that belong to their party, but for the rest of us, there's nothing to stop people from sitting down and debating it. And actually, the authors of this document, they wanted to say that this isn't just they didn't want this just to be a symbol, like just a symbolic thing released. They want people to actually sit down and have a discussion. Because there's a lot of stuff in there. There's stuff that people will disagree with. There's stuff people will agree with. There's stuff that will leave you scratching your head.
Sara Aronson, thank you so much for joining us again here on Fast Forward.
It's my pleasure, Dave.
You've been watching Fast Forward Newsline here on the Green Planet Monitor website. We come your way each week at the same time inside this little box. We're very generously supported by the Government of Canada, the Social Justice Fund of Unifor, and the Community Radio Fund of Canada. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us again next week. Bye-bye.